Part we talked about living in Babylon. We live in Babylon, which means that we live in this world, but we're not of this world. And we said if you're not transforming, you could be conforming. So we have to be careful because it's a friendly captivity. It's a sneaky one. It doesn't come with threats and violence, and it comes with very sneaky, friendly, comfortable suggestions, okay? And that's where we live, in a world that is trying to get you to conform to it, okay? And so if you're not transforming yourself or transforming your environment, if you're not being salt, adding flavor, light, being different, shining in the darkness, if you're not changing your surrounding, it's possible that it is changing you, okay? In the beginning, the Lord said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Subduing it has to do with controlling our environment, or our environment will control us. There isn't a Switzerland position where you're like, okay, you don't change me and I don't change you. No, let me tell you, someone is always being transformed. Someone's mind is always being renewed to something. Okay, and so we said, if you're not transforming, whether you're experiencing transformation or also transforming your environment, it's possible that the environment is transforming you. So you're being conformed to this world, which is what Romans 12:2 tells us not to do, okay? And so there's a temptation to adopt the Babylonian world and the Babylonian view instead of a biblical worldview. How many of you would agree that the world has a very different view of things than the Bible? So it's either or. We're going to either conform to the Babylonian worldview, or we're going to keep the biblical worldview, right? And so that's what we need to know our word. Then we talked about Babylon's first invitation is to let it feed you. Babylon wants to feed you. Look, this is really good. This is really yummy. This is great, right? Babylon wants you to eat and feed yourself spiritually, right? And renew your mind to what's on its table. And then we said, number 3, Babylon wants you to then worship its idols. Right? We just talked about that. We can't worship 2 masters. Only one. We have to pick. We have to choose. And so who will we worship is who will we serve. Who we serve is who we worship, and who we worship is who we become like. Amen. What you admire, what you hold dear, what you put your value on is what you're being transformed into. Okay? I mean, very simple. You just look at society. Why do they dress the way they do? Why do they act, sing, or talk the way they do? Why do they live the way they do? It's because somebody they admire is doing it. So Babylon wants to worship and bow to their idols, right? And then today we're going to chapter 4, and we're talking about another kind of worship, which is self-worship, okay? The world wants you to believe a lie that says that you're enough. I know you're confused right now. Well, am I not enough? I got a prophetic word that says that I was enough. No, you are enough to come to God. Listen, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to, fulfill all these rules in order to come to God, to have a relationship with God. He says, come as you are. Yes, you are enough for Him, but you're not enough just by yourself. Jesus said, apart from me, you can do nothing. Okay? So are we clear on that, right? I'm not saying you're not enough. Pastor told us we're not enough today. No, that's not what I said. Okay? But the world wants you to believe this lie that, you by yourself, you're enough. And that's called humanism. When people stop acknowledging, recognizing, and having any kind of need for God. They're like, we don't need God. We're ourselves. We're powerful. Because God created us powerful. Right? But if we fall into that lie, then trouble comes. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because if we have Jesus, that's all we need, right? It's the pearl of great price. It's the hidden treasure in the field. It's His kingdom. If we have Him, we have everything. Because in Him is everything that we need. And He's the one that gives us the desires of our heart, right? Okay, so let's go read this amazing, exciting story in Daniel chapter 4 and in verse 4. Did we find that slide? All right, let's show it real quick. Pull out your phone real quick. If you have this, okay. When we give our life, we find our life, okay? You can scan that. It'll take you to our YouTube channel where that is. But this is a really important teaching, and it kind of goes along with today's because it's actually a whole series, right? One of these lies that Babylon wants us to know, to believe today, is that we need to find ourselves, right? And we live in a world that is all about us. As a matter of fact, a little less than 20 years ago, this big company started, I'm going to step down so you can scan that QR code. This big company started a marketing campaign that to this day is probably one of the biggest, in the whole world, and started distributing these devices that a lot of you have in your hand. They're called iPhones. And they made a whole line of products, right? Still today. I have one too. Don't feel bad, right? But what's the message, right? It's iPhone, iMac, iCloud, and I matter, and no one else, And so it's the ideology behind it that makes me cringe, because we live in a world that is exactly all about itself, right? And this iPhone and every phone, right? They have this selfie camera where you don't even need someone to take a picture of you. You can do it all yourself. Again, I'm not condemning iPhones. I'm not condemning the ability to take a selfie or a picture, right? But is it not today's world where everybody is on their phone marketing themselves, and it's all about them? It's all about me. It's all about my life. It's all about look at me, what I know, what I can do for you. Give me, right? Attention, followers, likes, everything. And they start building a life that is all about them, and they don't need anyone else. Heck, some of they don't even need a job anymore. I just become famous enough on Instagram, and I don't even need anybody else in my life. Hashtag van life. Again, I'm not against some of the cool things that this can do, okay? But the ideology behind it and the stuff that is causing or facilitating, people to do is to live a life where they are self-sufficient. They need nobody, nothing, and definitely they don't need God. Are you with me? Yeah. And how many of you know we weren't created for that? We weren't created to live that way. Okay? So, let's go to Daniel chapter 4. And so anyways, that series that you saw up there, that'll help you understand, because we don't need to find ourselves. We need to find Jesus and then what he created us for, right? When you find Jesus, you can actually find who you really are. You can't find yourself apart from him. I need a year to find myself. Well, now I found myself, so I need 10 years to enjoy myself. No. Healthy boundaries. I need to protect my me time. That's not what the Bible says. Okay. So verse 4, Nebuchadnezzar. Now I want to remind you, Nebuchadnezzar was a king of one of the most powerful kingdoms in that time. He was incredibly creative, from the way he built, the Hanging Gardens, which was one of the, 7 wonders of the ancient world, right? To the way he killed people. Very creative in every way, in every aspect, right? And he was full of himself. He had seen the power of God, and he had recognized it a couple of times already because, he saw it through the life of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? But then here in verse 4, it says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was living in my palace in comfort and prosperity. Okay? He was living in his palace in comfort and prosperity, which is the motto of Babylon. Babylon is all about a friendly captivity. Come, you're going to be real comfortable. Everything is going to be great. Yeah, you just, eat from our table, worship our idols. We're going to be friends. Okay? That's the invitation. And he was exactly living that life, right? Of what? Comfort and prosperity. There's nothing wrong, listen to me again, against comfort or prosperity. But apart from the Lord, in living for that is the problem. Because we're not supposed to live for comfort and prosperity. We're supposed to live for Him. And in Him is prosperity. Okay? And so I hope I'm not confusing you, but maybe I'm confusing you and then unconfusing you, and that's okay. Because some things we got to clear up, right? Like, wait, I thought we wanted prosperity. Yes, we want prosperity, but we don't live for prosperity. We don't live for comfort, right? I'm not saying to, walk around and dress in sackcloth. That's what the religious Pharisees did, not us. Okay, and then let's go to verse 24. So I'm going to tell you a little bit what happened. He had a dream, another dream. Interesting how God speaks to heathen kings in dreams, huh? Sometimes we think God only speaks to Christians. No. God speaks to heathens, especially those that are in authority, right? Those that have influence. And so he had a dream, and this dream, again, he needed interpretation. So he finally gets Daniel to come over here, and Daniel hears the dream. Daniel himself is kind of, this is a bad dream. Like, he's like, it says that he was like a little bit startled when he heard the dream. Because imagine, right? Here's the king, and he had a dream, and it's bad, and now you have to tell him how bad it is for him. So he's like, man, like this guy has a fame of killing people, for less than this, and I'm the bearer of bad news. So he gives him the bad news, and in verse 24 it says, "This is what the dream means, Your Majesty, and what the Most High has declared will happen to my Lord the King." He's being very respectful right now because he's about to drop a bomb, right? It says, "You will be driven from human society, and you will live in the fields with the wild animals. You will eat grass like a cow, and you will be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 periods of time," or, it could be 7 years, "will pass while you live this way, until you learn that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world and gives them to anyone He chooses. But the stump and the roots of the tree were left in the ground. This means that you will receive your kingdom back again when you have learned that heaven rules." I need a t-shirt that says that. Heaven rules. Verse 27. I love this part because, you'll see the goodness of God here. It says, "King Nebuchadnezzar, please accept my advice. Stop sinning and do what is right. Break from your wicked past and be merciful to the poor. Perhaps then you will continue to prosper." Isn't that so nice? He's like, let me give you a piece of advice. Here's wisdom. Anybody ever given you wisdom and you didn't listen to it? Don't raise your hand, right? I feel like this is just such the heart of the Lord. Like, He's like, hey, listen, accept my advice. Proverbs speaks like this all the time. Proverbs is like, listen to me, pay attention to me, don't ignore me. I'm shouting it out from the rooftops. Be careful with this, be careful with that. Don't fall into this trap, don't fall into that trap. When you read Proverbs, you are listening to the advice that God is giving you for daily practical life. Read 1 chapter of Proverbs a day, keeps the devil away. King Nebuchadnezzar, accept my advice, stop sinning, right? There was an opportunity for repentance. There was an opportunity to turn around. And I want you to know something. In the big picture, we're all, and not just us, but the whole world right now is in this dispensation of time. It's this dispensation of grace, where everyone right now has the option to accept the advice and the invitation of the Lord to stop sinning and do what is right, and turn to the Lord. We live in this time, all of us, the whole world. This is break from your wicked past and be merciful to the poor. Perhaps you will continue to prosper. And here's what happened. 12 months later, he was taking a walk on the flat roof of the royal palace in Babylon. So how much time was there? 12 months, a whole year from this, right? And maybe he thought, okay, I made it. And this is what it says. As he looked out across the city, he said, "Look at this great city of Babylon. By my own power, I have built this beautiful city as my royal residence to display my majestic splendor." So he didn't learn the lesson, huh? Because when Daniel was talking to him, he told him, it's the Most High that rules over the kingdoms of the world. He gives them to anyone he chooses, even to the lowliest of people. That's in verse 17. Right? He was reminding Nebuchadnezzar, the glory that you have and all the amazing things you've done, you only have them because God has allowed you to. And so he gets this dream, he gets the interpretation, he gets a warning, and he gets 12 months, and then this fool says this stuff. "Look at my great city of Babylon. By my own mighty power, I have built this beautiful city as my royal residence to display my majestic splendor." That's the attitude of the world. That's the attitude of someone who has no need for God, someone who is self-sufficient, someone who is just self-reliant, who does not recognize the Lord, who is just, they know everything they need for themselves. They don't need anybody else. They live for themselves, right? And then it says, while these words were still in his mouth, a voice called down from heaven, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, this message is for you. You are no longer ruler of this kingdom. You will be driven from human society. You will live in the fields with the wild animals. You will eat like grass like a cow. 7 periods of time will pass while you live this way until you learn that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world and gives them to anyone he chooses." That same hour, the judgment was fulfilled. Nebuchadnezzar was driven from human society. He ate grass like a cow. He was drenched with the dew of heaven. He lived this way until his hair was long as eagle's feathers and his nails were like bird's claws. I want you to come with me to Romans chapter 1. Pretty crazy stuff, huh? I want you to know, God's not doing this to anybody, okay? This isn't like, I'm warning you because you're going to end up eating grass like a, no. Okay? God's not doing this to anybody. This is, remember, Old Testament is New Testament concealed. New Testament is Old Testament revealed. So we need to see what does this mean to us. We understand the very thing I've been explaining to you, which is a life who is apart from the Lord, who has no reliance on God, who has no recognition for God, who does not need God, who does not acknowledge God whatsoever. It's a life in trouble, right? And so Nebuchadnezzar is a picture of that very thing. And that's what Babylon is trying to pull us into and saying, hey, you're good by yourself. You don't need anybody. You don't need anything. You don't need God. Okay? He's trying to pull us into humanism. And Romans describes this in such a way, Romans in itself, the whole book of Romans is like the entire Bible in one book, okay? Because there's pictures. And sometimes people get confused like, wait, I thought there was grace and stuff. Why is it talking about God's anger? Well, in chapter 1 is describing what happened in the beginning in Genesis and what's happening, what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, what happened when sin came into the world and all this stuff. But I want us to look at verse 18, okay? So, because this will give you a picture, and a lot of you are probably going to recognize, oh, that's happening in our city, that's happening in our country, that's happening in our government. Okay, and verse 18 says, "But God shows his anger from heaven against all sinful, wicked people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. They know the truth about God." Say with me, they know the truth. Okay, so it says they know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. "For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky." How did God make it obvious to everyone? He just created the earth and sky. It's like, have you seen the earth and the sky? Well, then isn't it obvious? See, that is a very simple connection that every human being is wired to make. So then why do some people not believe? It goes on to say. It says, through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his external power and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. This is amazing. Nobody has any excuse for not knowing God or for not knowing that there is a God. Yes, it's true that maybe some people have not heard the gospel still today. But even those people have no excuse to know that there is a creator, that there is a God, that there is something way bigger. Why? Because they got to see creation, and they got to see the sky and the earth, and they got to see the works of the Lord. And the Lord is saying that is enough right there for people to recognize there is a God. It says, verse 21, yes, they knew God. So they're just playing dumb. They knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. And here's the big root of the problem. They knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. They wouldn't acknowledge him, And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. As a result, their minds became dark and confused. Are there some confused people today? Claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools. A different version says morons. Like literally. And instead of worshiping the glorious, ever-living God, they worship idols made to look like mere people and birds and animals and reptiles. You remember what the children of Israel did when Moses disappeared for 40 days to go up and be with God up in the mountain? They made a golden calf, like a cow. Why a cow? Okay, never mind. Verse 24 says, so God abandoned them to do whatever shameful things their hearts desired. A lot of people go, well, why did God abandon them? It's not like he abandoned them as if he was offended. But he released them to do what they were willing to do. Because remember, the one thing God won't cross is our will, right? God won't cross your will. And some people are like, well, no, God, I got saved the day that God wanted me to become saved. No, that's not true. You became saved. You got saved the day you decided to get saved. If it had been up to God, he would have saved you before you did all those other dumb things. Right? Like, he would have saved you from all that pain. He would have saved you from all those bad decisions. But it's not up to him, because he does not force himself on anybody's will. And so this is what this means. So God said, they were purposed to do these horrible, perverted things, so God abandoned them to do whatever shameful things their hearts desired. As a result, they did vile and degrading things with each other's bodies. They traded the truth of God for a lie. Now, isn't that crazy? They traded the truth of God for a lie. What do we spend so much time doing at church and ministry and counseling and sozo? Exchanging the lies of the devil for the truth of God. But what is exactly what people spend all this time doing? What Babylon is constantly trying to feed people is lies, so that they would exchange those lies instead of having the truth of God. Do you see how simple this actually is? And that's what's happening. That's why Babylon is wanting us to renew our minds so that we would take the lies instead of God's truth. And this is what they did. This is not new. This is what they did in the beginning. This is what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. This is what happened to humans who knew there was a God, but chose not to give him thanks, chose not to acknowledge him, and they traded the truth about God for a lie. So they worshiped and served the things God created instead of the Creator himself, who is worthy of eternal praise. And that is why God abandoned them to their shameful desires. And then it talks about homosexuality. It says even the women turned against the natural way to have sex and instead indulged in sex with each other. And the men, instead of having normal sexual relations with women, burned with lust for each other. Men did shameful things with other men. And as a result of this sin, they suffered within themselves the penalty they deserved. Sin has its own pain. Sin has its own consequences. It's like it's a self-inflicted wound. In verse 28, since they thought it foolish to acknowledge God, he abandoned them, third time, right? He abandoned them to their foolish thinking. Another version says to their warped mind, and he let them do things that should never be done. Their lives became full of every kind of wickedness, sin, greed, hate, envy, murder, quarreling, deception, malicious behavior, and gossip. Man, gossip's in the same paragraph as all that stuff. That's crazy. Huh? It's like we don't need a punchline. This is amazing. You know what it means? That their minds became warped. Have you ever left, well, obviously you live here, so you probably have. Have you ever left a piece of plastic in the car when it's 120 outside and probably 600 inside the car? And then you come back and the plastic is like completely in a different shape, right? And if you got here during the winter, you haven't experienced that yet, well, there's a warning. Don't leave plastic stuff in the car, you know. It's like you cannot put it back to its original shape. It's like it would take a whole process of probably putting it through the heat again and making it flat. You know, I've never tried, just throw them away, right? And that's what is describing that happened to people's minds when they gave themselves into these foolish ideas and these foolish gods and these idols, and they followed the desires of their deceived hearts, right, into this kind of perversion. Their minds became warped, which means that they actually believe that that is the truth. There's only one truth, and it's the truth of the Word of God. But when you renew your mind to something long enough, over and over, you can convince yourself that that is the truth. That Babylon's doctrine is the truth. You can make yourself believe that that's 100% the truth. Which is why we see the craziest behaviors about the dumbest, craziest, foolish things, ever in the history of humanity. Which is why there's people today who think they're cats and they're not faking it. I'm not saying all of them think they're animals, but let me tell you, there is a process of renewing your mind. Right? You start believing, oh yeah, well, no wonder, my nails keep growing and my voice is kind of like, so maybe I don't know how this process works, guys. Like, I don't know how this happens, but I know that the process happens through a little bit of indoctrination and a little bit of lies at a time. A little bit at a time, 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 right? It's the same thing. The enemy provides some false evidence. And so they take the false evidence, they go, well, maybe that's why this, maybe that's why this, maybe that's why I've never felt myself. Maybe, instead of going to the truth of God, they're eating and they're feeding off Babylon's table, and Babylon is backed by the government, which goes, yes, that's probably true. And if you think that's your reality, then that's, by all means, you're right. So, it is a lot more official when it has the stamp of a government behind it, right? It would surely help solidify the lies that they're believing, right? It describes it here. Nebuchadnezzar turned into an animal. He lost his mind because he was full of himself. And he lost his mind and became like an animal. And people today are losing their minds and thinking the most foolish, craziest things, and Babylon is backing it up. So more power to them, and that's become their reality. So their minds have become warped, and they've gone against their nature, how God created them to be. Doesn't that explain a lot of what's going on in today's world? But see, the hopeful thing is to know that it's not new. It didn't start, in any of these administrations. Right? It started way back then. It's the same strategy, it's the same tactic, it's the same purpose to destroy. Why? Because the enemy hates that we're made in the amazing and beautiful likeness and image of God. So he's trying to destroy us to become and mutilate and act like something that we're not. Because he's jealous that we were created in his likeness and image and not him. We get to be called children of God, not him. And so he's going to do everything in his power, even up to convincing the highest of authorities and changing laws and everything possible, to destroy as many lives as possible. To the point when they realize, they've done horrendous things they cannot come back from, it's too late. And so what we should have is compassion, right? Always compassion. Why? Because very sadly, a lot of them do believe that that is truth. Because they've freely eaten from Babylon's table. They've bowed down to their idols. They've been transformed and conformed to Babylon. And so that really is the thing. So that's why angry Christians don't help the case. Right? Which is why we need to learn how to keep our love on, even when it's toughest. Oh, Pastor, that's a turn of events right there. Right? We know it's wrong. We know it's not God. Well, now we know how it happened. And so let's go back to Daniel chapter 4. And it's where we're going to close today. But there is hope. And this hope is really simple. It's very easy and it's very simple. And one of the things that's said in Romans is that they did not acknowledge God. They did not thank him. They ignore him. People purposely choose to ignore God. And actually, let me say something here. Why would people purposely choose to ignore God? Well, a lot of times it's because they have an offense towards God. A lot of times it's because they've seen a bad example of God in their lives. A lot of times it's because they've been hurt by even church or spiritual authority. Or their parents just never, ever taught them or never raised them in the Lord, and they didn't know any better. But the thing is, what it tells us here is like everyone knows that there is a God. And if they say they're not, is because they purposely, intentionally, and willingly are choosing to not acknowledge him, to reject him, to turn away from him, to not give him thanks. Are we clear on that? Yeah. Okay, so even the person that tells you that, no, they never believe in God, no. You just have to look at the sky and the earth. So you're purposely choosing to not acknowledge the Lord, to not acknowledge God. And so, again, that leads you into a life of arrogance and self-sufficiency away from God. And, to a certain point, lose your mind. Right? I'm not saying that every atheist or every person who doesn't believe in God, is into all these kinds of perversion. I'm not saying that. But eventually it leads to, a warped mind that believes they really don't need the Lord. And so how do you come back from this? Well, in Daniel chapter 4, in the verse, let's go to verse 34. This is the turnaround of the story. It says, after this time had passed, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven. Say with me, I looked up to heaven. Okay? My sanity returned, and I praised and worshiped the Most High and honored the one who lives forever. Wow. Just like that. What did he do? He looked up to heaven. What does it mean to look up to heaven? He acknowledged the God. He acknowledged the God of heaven. Right? The thing that it tells us in Romans that people willfully choose to not do, that they choose to not acknowledge God, choose not to thank him. So Nebuchadnezzar turned his eyes to the Lord, and he was restored. That's amazing. What does that tell you? It tells you no matter how far deep anyone is, no matter how messed up and how warped their minds might have gotten from eating from Babylon, from being conformed to the world, from going down, against their own nature, against sin. It doesn't matter how much they have sinned against their own bodies and how far gone they are. Anyone who calls upon the name of the Lord, anyone who looks up to heaven, to God, and acknowledges Him and thanks Him, right? Anyone who turns to Him will be restored. That's it. It just takes a moment of turning to the Lord and saying, I was wrong. I'm saying, you are the God in heaven. You are the one. And God instantly restored him. And I want you to read with me for a little more. It says, my sanity returned, and I praised and worshiped the Most High and honored the one who lives forever. And verse 36 says, when my sanity returned to me, so did my honor and glory and kingdom. That's amazing. He did say, my honor and glory and kingdom. See, God has no problem with us having honor, glory, and a kingdom. Pastor, I thought you just said the opposite. No, He has a problem with us not acknowledging Him and that every good thing comes from Him and thinking that we are enough by ourselves. Are you with me? It says, my advisors and nobles sought me out. I was restored as head of my kingdom with even greater honor than before. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and glorify and honor the King of heaven. All His acts are just and true, and He's able to humble the proud. See, sometimes we go on the other side of the ditch, right? And we're like, this false humility thing, right? I am nothing. I am no one. I'm the dirt of the earth. I'm a worm. I just this lowly peasant who deserves nothing. And God's like, okay, no. You need to understand, God has no problem with you being great. He will make you great, right? So that you point to Him, so you glorify Him, because you're His representative here on earth. So if you're just a worm in the dirt, you're not doing a very good representation of Him. See, again, it's not I am enough, but it's with Him is all I need. Me and Him, right? I have everything if I have Him. But by myself, no. And this is the lesson that Nebuchadnezzar learned. He was full of arrogance before, but now who he glorified? He glorified Him. He recognized every good thing comes from Him. He's the one that restored him. He's the one that gave him the kingdom. He's the one that created him with such creativity. So even unbelievers are created in the likeness and image of God and have gifts and talents that God has given them. Problem is, a lot of them are not acknowledging, thinking, and recognizing where all of that comes from. And they're trying to do life by themselves, on their own. Why? Because it's the scheme of the enemy, right? He's the prince of this world. He's the prince of Babylon. And he's here to kill, steal, and destroy. So there's hope. Lift your eyes to the Lord. There's hope for your coworkers. There's hope for people in your life, people in your family. It doesn't matter how far gone they are. All it takes is a moment to lift our eyes up to the Lord and to be restored. I always say gratitude is your protection against pride. I used to say gratitude is a vaccination for pride, but that whole medical misinformation stuff. And so I am not saying that gratitude is a vaccine. But gratitude will protect you from arrogance, right? It'll protect you from pride. It'll protect you from becoming self-reliant. Even, I want to challenge you, even in the areas of your life where you think you're good. Like, I've done real good in this area of my life. Like, no, invite the Lord. Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. Don't lean on yourself. Don't lean on your own strengths, on your own abilities. Well, God gave them to me, yes, but He's telling you, trust in Him. Don't lean on just you. Acknowledge Him, include Him, make Him a part of all your ways, all your decisions, because then He will make your path straight. He will show you the way to go. He will show you the right decision. He will show you the right thing to do. Not the good thing, but the God thing. You know what I mean? There's good options a lot of times, but which is the perfect will of God? I want the perfect will of God. It's good.